All right, here we all are. Just a moment, I've got to do something here. All right, away we go. Happy to see you all. Can you all hear me? Yes? So everyone's here. Good. Who's my host today?
Hi, Robina. It's Alexis.
Oh, hello, Alex. Good to see you, sweetheart. Good. So, you're not going to introduce or say something, Alexis, as the host?
Oh, do you want me to?
Isn't that your job? You're supposed to welcome me and welcome the people.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Welcome, Venerable Robina. We're so happy to have you here teaching us today.
And all the people, you've welcomed them already, have you?
I did. Well,
Okay.
welcome everybody if I hadn't welcomed you before.
Yeah, okay. And you don't have to introduce me. My name is Robina, just in case you didn't know, in case we haven't met. It's always new people coming. So I'm Robina, and I live in Santa Fe. And here we are together to talk for an hour and have a little chat, a conversation, listen, think, analyze, contemplate these different viewpoints coming from the Buddha about how to work on our minds, really. I mean, Lama Yeshe, we're paraphrasing Lama Yeshe, how to be your own therapist. Lama actually said how to be your own psychologist, you know. But I mean, also this. So I mean, yeah. So what to talk about? Anyone got any questions? Got any ideas? Got any thoughts? Got anything you're dying to know? You want to ask me something? If not, it's just perfectly fine. I'm not pressuring. If there is anything, anybody wants to say something? No? Okay. Well, then I'll have to think of something, won't I? Hello, George in New York. George is in New York. Hello, sweetheart. You still in New York or you're in Timbuktu? In New York still? Good.
I'm still in New York.
Good. You doing okay? Good, George. Happy to see you.
I'm doing all right. Hanging in there.
Good, Zoe. Good.
Good to see you too.
Yes. Okay. So, there's something I was thinking about, you know, how, I mean, we all have, you know, every teaching we have, and every time we have questions and answers, we all ask the same questions because we all have the same problems. And it's interesting because from the Buddhist point of view, we're all just recipes of the same, we're all just variations of the same recipe. Buddha's view of the mind is quite surprising to hear this. You know, Buddha's observation, Buddha's model of the mind, and it's extremely extensive, vast and extensive, and it's coming from these Indians before him. They mapped the mind, which is quite unusual, not the brain, but the actual subjective cognitive process itself. These genius Indians. And this is only becoming evident to us now in the West. We're sort of only realizing that we're not the most smarty pants people in the world. You know, other people have done some pretty good things before us. Anyway, the thing is, we all can see when we start to become conscious, when we start to become conscious of our thoughts, start to notice that our thoughts actually, you know, we're vaguely conscious before when they're all chatting away all morning and all night, but we don't pay much attention until they're shouting, but we don't really know what to do with it all, you know, and we mostly are fixated on the thing out there that seems to be the cause of what's in here. That's how we think about it. That's our analysis, isn't it? We're obsessed with the horrible husband. We're obsessed with the bad job. We're obsessed with the beautiful daughter. We're thinking always of the object, the thing out there. Well, Buddha's expertise is what goes on in here. It's not kidding. To say this is really true. What's fascinating, this model of the mind refers to every single being on the planet, including the dogs and the animals and beings we can't even see. We're all different manifestations of these different states of mind. And he divides them into all the neurotic, miserable, me-based, fear-based, distressing ones. We know them, attachment, anger, you name it. Then all the positive, optimistic, you know, self-confident, useful ones, love, compassion, humility, kindness, you name it, strong ones as well, not all wishy-washy. So what we're trying to do is, from the Buddhist perspective, it's almost so simple it's embarrassing, is learn to become familiar with the contents of our mind. So why? So that we can lessen the neuroses and grow the goodness. I mean, it's as simple as this. And as profound, you know, because it goes deep, levels and levels. This internal subjective cognitive process itself goes to extremely subtle levels of even thought, you know. So the trouble is, though, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to fix it all overnight. Nothing, Rome was not built in a day. This we know. So part of the trouble, the problem we all know is that we can't stand the anger, the fears, the anxiety, the jealousy, the depression. We've all got variations of these. So, so it's bad enough having them. It's sort of like having I always use the analogy, always, it's such a good one, of all these roommates. So if you have these wacky roommates next door who shout and yell and get drunk and play loud music, of course, all you're thinking of day and night is these wretched people. They loom large. You might have lovely neighbors the other side, but you can't hear them. So you just take them for granted, the nice ones. But the loud ones make a big noise. So it's like that in our head, isn't it? And then, of course, this is a tragedy. This is the Buddhist analysis. The anger's there, the jealousy's there, the anxiety's there. But then what happens is we get sucked into it. It's sort of like the neighbors next door. We don't think there's any choice but to get angry with the neighbors next door. We don't think there's any choice but to be thinking about them and wishing they'd go away and talking about them and wishing this and how dare they this. So we don't think there's any choice but to have this big, loud commentary about the neighbors next door. Well, just make those neighbors your own roommates in your own head, and it's exactly the same. But when you hear the anger coming, when you hear the fears coming, when you get the depression coming, then all the other thoughts pop up in our mind that we get angry about the anger, we get depressed about the depression, we get anxious about the anxiety. So we keep piling in new bad roommates until one day we can't cope, So we just assume we don't have a choice but to do this. We just buy into all these voices and then we believe them. So if those bad roommates next door are saying, Robina's a creep and how dare she do this and we hate our next door neighbor, you're gonna have a panic attack. Well, anger inside you thinks you're a creep. Anger inside you thinks the boss is a creep, and you don't question it. You don't go, well, I wonder if that's true. Anger pops up, how dare, and then guilt. Guilt is just anger against yourself. I'm so hopeless, I'm no good, I'm too fat, I look in the mirror, I can't stand. It's like a roommate telling you that you're a creep. But what's absolutely astonishing is that whatever the thought arises in our mind, whatever roommate pops up, we believe the story. And of course, it's always the negative ones. We don't even have a roommate that says, Robina, you're doing a good job. Someone else might say it to us. You're not as bad as you think, Robina. You're doing okay. But the other roommate comes up and says, no, I'm still a creep. No, you're not right. You've got to look at this and think, this is really fascinating. And as Lama Zopa says, you see, the Buddhist view, I'll quote him in a minute. The Buddhist view is that one of the functions of all the unhappy states, the crazy roommates, the anger, the fears, the jealousy, the depression, they're based in being conceptual thoughts deep in the bones of our being, but we've practiced them so often that there's emotion involved now. And then but he says, one of their functions is they always exaggerate. They're never quite truthful. Anger exaggerates the boyfriend's badness. Guilt exaggerates your badness. Attachment exaggerates your new baby's goodness. There's always a distorted. They're never accurate. But so bad enough, Lama Zopa says, that we see things in a mistaken way, including ourselves. Bad enough that we exaggerate our qualities, our bad qualities. Bad enough we do that. But the worst part, the part that keeps us paralyzed, is that we believe them. This is a very interesting concept, I mean, cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy in the West, this is really the closest to what Buddha's saying. By reconfiguring these roommates, by changing the thoughts, by getting your good roommates out and start to think thoughts like, well, I'm not as bad as I think. Maybe I'm doing okay. Maybe I'm not that fat and ugly. Maybe I'm not too bad. Maybe I'm making an effort. Even tentatively having some positive thoughts, and don't wait for them to come. The negative ones just seem to come, don't they? You don't invite them in. They just come flooding in the door. So why not? We have to actively cultivate having a positive thought. It almost sounds so corny. It almost sounds silly. It really does. But this is what we have to do. This is what practice is. I'm not joking. So the painful part is because the habits, we've got good habits too. They're our saving grace. But we take them for granted. If you started writing a list down of all your good qualities, and all your advantages, like your reasonable house, reasonable reasonable friends, you've got reasonable intelligence, you've got fairly good ethics, you've got money in the bank, you've got food in the fridge, you've got a job, you've got good friends, loving husband. You start to write down the advantages in your life and your own good qualities. I try my best, I'm kind to animals, I try not to lie. These are also roommates in your head, but they are just quietly lying in the cupboard and under the mattress. They don't come out, and we don't invite them out. We've got to invite the thoughts. But thoughts, you see, we think these negative thoughts are like an invader. They're like this invading person from next door. They're almost like as if this person is in there and they say you're a creep, Robina, and we just assume they're truthful. I mean, you've got to admit it's pretty weird. Why would we necessarily believe? It's because the thoughts are in my mind. This is what's fascinating. So, of course, at the moment, all these thoughts are like a big soup, in a great big soup of emotions. And we really can't hear most of the thoughts until some thoughts shout louder than the rest. Our head most of the time is like a football field a mile away with 40,000 people all screaming. You hear this roar. It's 40,000 voices all screaming at once. But because all the noises are about the same, the same level, it just sounds like a noise. So this is our head. It's just back there in the back. We don't notice the thoughts. We don't notice until one of them shouts louder. Some anxiety comes, some anger comes, and it comes louder than the others. Like one voice shouts louder than all the other 40,000, and then you can hear it. That's what our head is. And so then, because in our culture, we don't have methods for sorting out all those thoughts. We have methods for fixing the brain and all those things, but we don't have many cognitive methods. We have more and more nice methods these days in therapy, but people are learning a lot from these Indians, I tell you, But the Buddhist approach is this one, that this mind of ours, this capacity for cognition, that's what your mind is. We're not talking about the brain here. We're talking about the actual cognitive process itself. It's quite subtle. And the moment we live at the grossest level, we live at the level of conceptuality and sensory. And this very gross aspect of ourselves, we've got these much subtler levels, Buddha says. And what the Buddha's finding, and anybody who's practiced Buddhism since then, all the great yogis in the present or over the centuries who've done the job that Buddha says you can do, who've followed his methodology and proven him to be right and accomplished the same goal that Buddha did of ridding the mind of all the rubbish and growing all the goodness. They also, when you read, it's very inspiring to do this. We need to be inspired by what our potential is. If we just think that our mind is innately chaotic, if we think all those angry thoughts are set in stone, that they're real parts of me like an extra finger, then reason to be depressed. But that's why we're depressed, because we really believe these angry thoughts, these jealous thoughts. We don't know where they come from. We've got no idea. Mummy didn't teach us. I mean, Buddha says we bring them from a past life, but we just believe them. And then we define ourselves by those thoughts. No wonder we kill ourselves, because we believe those crummy thoughts. This is what's so astonishing. 72 people can tell you, no, you're not as bad as you think, Robina. We know this. You're dying to hear it. You're hungry to hear it, but we do not believe it. We've got to admit this is pretty fascinating. So the miracle of the first, is to start to even know intellectually that all this stuff going on in my mind is merely conceptual thoughts. They are conceptual thoughts. They are opinions. I am this, I am that, he is this, she is that. And they're not set in stone. Thoughts can be changed. This is so simple, we can't hear it, Because, what we don't understand, this is the Buddhist analysis also, what we don't understand, all those thoughts, are deep in our bones from having thought them that often that we believe they're absolute truth. That's why they're so solid inside us. But that's what we have. So the job, as Lama puts it, of being our own therapist, working every day on your mind, getting a bit of meditation, doing a bit of practice, starting to become familiar, starting to listen to all these endless stories, and learning to bring out our wise roommates, our intelligent roommates that start to help us start becoming rational and clear and start listening to and then arguing. This is what you do every day. Or maybe, the low self-esteem comes and the positive thought pops up. Well, Robina, maybe you're not as bad as you think. That's arguing with it right there. But if you just buy into it, then it keeps getting worse and worse every day. So this is what practice is. I mean, it sounds so silly almost, but it's changing your thoughts, deconstructing, unpacking, unraveling. There's all this chaos in here, all these conceptual stories, and then learning to distinguish the facts from the fictions. Honestly, this is the job of being a Buddhist. All the neurotic ones, Buddha says, have a particular characteristic of being inflations, exaggerations, distortions, embellishments. Attachment exaggerates the delicious qualities of somebody. Anger exaggerates the ugly qualities of somebody. They all have their own job of embellishing, and they're the ones we believe. They're the ones that the roommates that are so loud running the house, The valid roommates, wisdom, self-confidence, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, they're in sync with reality. They're valid because they're reasonable. They're reasonable. So this is hard work. These habits are very, very ancient. Our mummies didn't teach us. I mean, my mother did not teach me to be angry. I knew how to do it. But this is the hardest job we'll ever do. So one of the reasons is because they're so ancient inside us and we believe their stories. The other reason is because we know we're angry. We know we're anxious. We know we're jealous. But our explanation of why is off the wall, Buddha says. We over-exaggerate. So we over-exaggerate the causes as being the outside world. We are fixated on the outside world. So even, this is not to criticize us. We tend to hear this, we get guilty that we think we're all so you mean I'm all the blame, it's all my mind, is it? Well, Buddha says to some degree, yes, it is. But not to hear it as guilty, to hear it as sadness, because this is why we suffer. But we hear it as punitive. Oh, you're so attached, you're so angry, you're the blame. It's so heavy how we hear it. So even when we have the most terrible suffering, when our beloved dies, when you have terrible accidents, when you get cancer, I mean, we naturally think I'm suffering because my beloved died. I'm suffering because I got cancer. I'm suffering because my house burned down. They are valid, they are real causes of what's going on. But the Buddha's making this extra thing. He says, yes, the house did burn down. And yes, the husband was kind to you. We also blame the people for the happy feelings. I'm happy. Why? My husband's kind to me. I'm sad. Why? My boyfriend died. These are the valid reasons we give in the world. So coming back to the thing here, so I'm depressed. Or why are you depressed, Robina? Because my husband died. So that's true, but all Buddha's saying, the external world, absolutely, of course it plays a role, but all he's saying is, it's not the whole thing. And this is where his expertise comes in. That what goes on in your mind is the main source. What goes on in your mind is the main source. So using extreme examples, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who's said to be, he's like proof of the pudding of this path. You could say it like that, the proof of the pudding of this path. He's done this job we're describing. Let's say he's accomplished it, which means he's rid his mind of all the rubbish, no longer anger, no longer jealousy, no longer low self-esteem, no longer fears, no longer attachment, as hard as that appears to us to even imagine as possible, but this is the Buddha's view. So that means if there's none of that left in his mind, what is there? Well, there's joy, love, compassion, generosity, forgiveness, enthusiasm, intelligence, self-confidence. These are who we really are, Buddha says. And the other stuff is the stuff that is there, but we can remove it. This is the part that's quite shocking. We can't get used to this, but this is Buddha's view. So let's just say it's true that he has accomplished this. Let's just say it's true. Then how would he respond when a bad thing happens? This is the point. You need to use these examples. This is Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist psychology. So the example would be when he had a stroke. He had a stroke in 2011. I was in Australia at the time at the centre, in a centre 2 hours north of Melbourne. We had a big retreat, a couple hundred people, and Rinpoche had a stroke that evening. They took him to the hospital, this Catholic hospital. And the next morning, his attendant sent a little video of a message from Rinpoche. Well, he'd had a stroke, okay? It was quite serious. And this message, when he spoke, he looked all puffed up because all the drugs. He sounded like a senile drunk person, okay? Really kind of completely ridiculous. But he was laughing. He was joyful. Now, this sounds quite demented, doesn't it? He's just had a stroke. What the hell is he doing being joyful? Because this is what we can't comprehend. We can't comprehend, because it doesn't exist in our modern psychology, it does not exist in our neuroscience, the possibility that you can become one of these bodhisattvas, which means you can rid the mind utterly and completely of all neuroses, all fear, all ego. It's in fact, if we think of it in our terms, we think that's a person who's insane. From our model of the mind, to hear that a person can give up all fears, all ego, all anger, all jealousy forever, that we think is deeply mental illness. So it's very hard for us to hear that. Even as Buddhists, when we read the literature and hear about how this is possible, it's hard to imagine. So we've really got to do a lot of thinking to imagine how this is possible, you know? So in other words, if he's like that, that means he doesn't suffer. What's suffering? Suffering is when the delusions are arising. You suffer because you have delusions. This is even more shocking to us, because if he's got no delusions, if he's got no attachment, no ego, no fears, he's got only love, only wisdom, only compassion, only joy. This is not joking, okay? Then it is impossible to ever suffer. These are facts according to the Buddhist model. This is so radically different from our ordinary model. It really does take a lot of thinking about, because it just sounds like mental illness. We don't posit such a possibility. It seems too peculiar, you know? But forget even Lama Zopa and his stroke and sounding like a senile drunk, but being joyful. And why is because, you know, he say all these bodhisattvas have so much compassion for suffering beings, that when they see suffering, they empathize so enormously, but it doesn't drag them down. They get courage from this and want to even happily take on the suffering of others. They'd rather have the suffering than others. So it gives them incredible courage, you know? I mean, these Catholic nuns at this hospital, he was there a few weeks, they couldn't get over this weird person who was always joyful and funny and cracking jokes while he was struggling to talk, to walk, and to do all his work of getting better from the stroke. And all these Tibetan, you know, he had two little Tibetan monks taking care of him, an Australian monk called Roger. They were all laughing, cracking jokes as well. They'd never seen anything like it. There was no distress. They weren't suffering. This is hard to imagine. We in fact we almost think they'd be inhuman if you didn't have sadness and things. You know, this is why it's hard to hear. But think about His Holiness. Dalai Lama is even a better example in the sense that he's more ordinary. I mean, Lama Zopa is so extreme and unusual. He doesn't sleep. He meditates all night. His most unusual aspect. But His Holiness really makes the effort to act like an ordinary person. So he's now 85, right? 85. Getting on for 86. He was born in 1935. 87 he is now. So then, since he was 15, he was appointed to be the king of Tibet and to run the Tibet, being the boss of Tibet. So he hasn't stopped. He's now 85. He hasn't stopped, you could say, for 70 years helping to try to change Tibet, helping to try to change the world. His suffering, I mean, if you think of ordinary world, his own people slaughtered, more than a sixth of the population destroyed, continue to be destroyed, Buddhism destroyed, the buildings destroyed, the environment destroyed. You know, but he's never stopped with enthusiasm and joy and confidence and no anger and no distress and no depression and no anxiety. He tries to act like an ordinary person, but you know, he can't fool us. So we've got to ask the question, you know, well, I wonder what he did to be like this. It's kind of unusual, you know. Well, he's doing what this job I'm describing. He's worked on his mind. So if we do suffer when our beloved dies, when we do suffer when we get cancer, when we suffer when our house burns down, when we suffer when our sister leaves us or is mean to us, whatever it is, there's always the two things going on. There's the thing out there, and then there's your mind. So we normally in our world focus entirely on the outside thing. And whatever arises in here, we don't think we have any control over it. We just think this is natural, you know, and then if someone does something I don't like, we just think it's natural, I'll get angry, and then we blame the person. When our husband dies or I get cancer, we just think it's natural, I get depressed. We've all got our own personalities, but we don't think that plays much role. Lama Zopa said, this is very shocking. Lama Zopa said the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Hear those words. It's almost too shocking to believe, but think about it. It's true. In other words, we're so focused on the outside, on the children, on the husband, on the house, on the job, what people think of us, what this, everything, all our mind from the time we woke up in the morning and the time we go to bed, what are we 100% preoccupied with? The outside world. And then when things do happen in here, we feel it's just this natural response to these events about which we have no choice. I think that's how we are. So the Buddha is like the opposite. The world is real. Yes, your boyfriend did die. You do get cancer. The husband is mean to you. You did win $1 million in the lottery. These are external events and they're true. Okay, Buddha's got his own explanation for why they happen. But he's saying, given that we can't control what goes on out there, given that we haven't got that much power, given that we can't make everything the way we want it, which is how we try all day. We try to manipulate the outside world all day to make it exactly the way I think it should be, because that's what we think happiness is. He says it's far better. Yeah, work on the outside world, be reasonable, but how about your mind? So that's the real expertise of being a Buddhist. And this takes enormous, it's like reversing the energy of a bomb. In other words, what's the analysis? You know, let's say your husband dies. Of course, in the beginning, it's so overwhelming. You can't even do much analysis. You're just living in the pain, you know, trying to deal with the things that have to happen. The grief is so unbearable. But if we wanted to do a Buddhist analysis of it, then we should ask ourselves, well, what's grief? I mean, His Holiness, when his mummy died, he would talk about his mum and he would cry. But then within a minute, he'd change the subject and he wouldn't be crying. So his crying was because he had a close connection with his mother. He appreciated his mother, how compassionate and kind she'd been all his life. And it's like this, and he was delighting in this marvelous person. But he wouldn't, this is really weird to talk about, he wouldn't have been suffering. His heart wouldn't have been broken in the way ours breaks. And why does our heart break and not his? Because he's given up attachment, given up fears, given up jealousy, given up despair. But there's still tears out of compassion. He didn't, you know, there'd be a sadness, but that deep sense of pain we feel that sometimes takes us months, if not years, and some people never get past it. That comes from our mind. That comes from our mind. And what part of our mind? That comes from attachment. What's attachment? This primordial, deepest of the deepest of the deepest delusion in the bones of our being that is so primordial. It's like, it's just normal, you know. So this attachment is like, it's like we're half a person. And it's this emotional hunger. We're dissatisfied. It's emotional hunger to find somebody, something, somewhere, that's such that when we get it, it'll fill us up and make us happy. Being rough about it. Or another way to put it more primordially, attachment is this constant assumption that I must only get the nice things, you know. So when that is thwarted, that's what suffering is. That's anger, that's despair. So the healing we go through is not the healing of the external, is the healing of the internal. And that's why it takes us time, you know. So we tend to criticize ourselves. We hear this as criticism when we hear Buddha talk like this. Oh, you mean it's my fault? That's our own mistake. He doesn't say it like that. We hear it as guilt and blame, you know. But the Buddha says, the more we see our mind, the more we see our pain, our dissatisfaction, our jealousy, our fears, our loneliness, our expectations, the more we see this, not guilt, but we should be weeping with compassion for ourselves, because this is why we suffer. And Buddha happens to say, he's found from his own experience that we can gradually deconstruct all this nonsense and get rid of it. This is what he's saying, you know. So it's a very different view. We use these simple words, but it's a very different analysis, you know. And so in happiness, what's happiness come from? Where does suffering come from? Not the boyfriend. Where does happiness come from? Not the boyfriend. Where does the suffering come from? Mainly the mind. Where does this happiness come from? Mainly the mind. So His Holiness, for 70 years, you could say he's a happy guy, in spite of this nightmare he's been dealing with. And he never gives up. He's always got this enthusiasm, but he still cracks jokes. He's funny. He's, he tries to act normal and say he gets angry, but you just know it's not true. He's got this enormous enthusiasm, this joy, this compassion, this kindness, this humanity, So happiness comes from the mind, a joyful mind, a loving mind, a kind mind. So any happiness, put it this way, any happiness we've had in this life is coming because of our own virtues. They're our saving grace. If you're mainly driven by attachment and despair and anger and jealousy, look at the world. Then you are only suffering. Look at people, not being mean, but look at people who are really self-centered. I'm not being critical. I'm not being critical. This is why we suffer. They are only ever miserable. But if we can access our love and kindness and delight in our good qualities and grow those, that is literally the main cause of happiness. So even when things happen that are terrible, you can remain with equanimity and you can learn to access your joy and your compassion. And then you see how the suffering, it increases your compassion, increases your humanity, increases your enthusiasm to want to help others, So I think it's about time you ask me some questions. I've been talking for 33 minutes. It's really more like 65 because I speak slowly today, but it's still double the pace of most people, apparently. Okay, ask me questions. Anything at all, I don't mind. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe you agree with me. Susie, question. Sweetheart.
Thank you, Venerable, for teaching.
Sweetheart.
So I'm trying to be my own, I've lost you, there you are. I'm trying to be my own therapist about overwhelm. And I just would like to pick
Much work, you mean, so many things to do. You mean that?
Yeah, and how that sometimes can make you feel like you're going to internally combust.
Exactly.
So it's how I'm just fascinated now. Everything I do is about how I keep steady.
I understand.
And I just would like to know.
I understand.
What you'd say about that.
I understand. I mean, it's really straightforward that sometimes it is just too much and we just can't cope because we don't have the bandwidth. We're not that capable. So if I look at someone like Lama Zopa or His Holiness, who if they don't have delusions, then they can do 20 times more than we do and not get stressed. So we're not like that. So we have to know our capabilities. So that's a really crucial point. It's a contingent thing. The extent to which we can handle a lot of jobs has to be the extent to which we don't and do need sleep, our physical health, or many, many other things. But so that's the physical components. We have to be reasonable, So let's look at the mental one. I think everybody in this room, everybody we know these days, it's just the nature of life. We are all busy. It's one of our favorite words. We are always busy. And we're not only busy, but we're too busy. I mean, do we all agree, people? We seem to have dozens of jobs to do and dozens of things we have to accomplish. And it's never ending. And I'm not being critical. This is a fact, So one of the things we have to realize is what happens when we get busy. Now, what happens? Look what happens when we get tired. If you're working hard, got so many jobs, then I would suggest the main source of the stress are the viewpoints in the mind. I'm so busy. I can't handle this. This is too much. I'm so exhausted. I can't do this. This is too much. The anger arises. The attachment for comfort arises. I'm not joking. These are the main source of the stress, because for example, just being tired. So the logic for us is, if I'm tired, the next millisecond, the logic for us is, I need to be feeling stressed about this. The anxiety that arises that you won't get your sleep, just the thought of it makes us exhausted. So it's like, yes, we still have to be limited. Yes, we have to know what we can and can't do. Yes, we've got to get some sleep. But so much of the pain comes from the viewpoints in the mind that are so typical and so normal we don't even notice them. So I remember years ago when I was working for Wisdom Publications, when I was living in England in the 80s. Excuse me. I worked in London. And, you know, we like to be busy. You're a busy girl. You get things done. It's great. You're an action girl. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to do things. It's wonderful to get things done, be useful, help people. It's great. So, I mean, I'm an action girl. I like to do things. I did my job and I do all this and doing that. And then I made a decision. I noticed when you wrote emails, I know we didn't have so many emails in the 80s, did we? What did I do then? I must have written letters on my Olivetti. How weird. I forget. No, I did, because when I was editing books, I remember I'll never forget when I edited How to Meditate, that book of wisdoms. I edited it and I did 7 complete retypes on my Olivetti manual with carbon paper. I'll never forget. I used to lug around my little green Olivetti manual typewriter with me. It was so hilarious. It's like another world. Anyway, I remember vividly deciding, I made a conscious decision, I would never again say the words, I am busy. So I don't anymore. I never use those words. And so because I even stopped saying the words, I am busy, I began to stop thinking I am busy, which takes time. I'm not trying to say I'm such a holy person. I need my sleep, I promise you. So part of that reason was too, part of that process was if I needed sleep, I would happily take it. Because sometimes we get a bit like victims. So in the office we had in London, I had a very tall desk and a high chair. I had a little spot under my desk. And if at 2 in the afternoon, I needed a rest, I would lie on the floor and have a big rest. Whenever I needed it, I would have it. So I stopped saying I'm too busy or even busy, and I stopped thinking it. So then you know you're busy. I am busy. And even still, it would become sometimes overwhelming. But then, you know, I just would never say those words. And then I'd analyze, and you've got to use different tricks, you know, because sometimes you just can't do every job. I mean, Lama Zopa, for example, at any given time, when we did publish this book called Dear Lama Zopa, which is a compilation of a bunch of the letters people have written him and then his response. And then Holly, he's one of his secretaries who'd write his letters. She said at any given time, he's got a folder of 2,000 letters. 2,000 human beings from around the world who write to him to get advice. Now, he never gets upset about it. He never gets stressed, and he will write the letters when the time has come. And even one of my friends who had cancer, she got her answer 2 years later, but she said the timing was perfect. So it's like he works day and night. He's got so many projects. I just can't believe it. He doesn't sleep. But he's always smiling, always cracking jokes. So all I can say is it's good to know there's a possibility to never be anxious and stressed and have 2,000 letters that are his responsibility. But the point is you can only do as what you can. So it doesn't mean it's not important, but we get all this sense of neurotic responsibility, this guilt, I'm a bad person. All this stuff is so deep in our brain, we can't even hear it. So we've got to unpack all these concepts, unpack all these assumptions and do what we can with try to have enthusiasm. And then sleep like a baby and then get up again next morning. So it's so much of it is the layers and layers and layers of very fast, tightly built in viewpoints, all centered around poor me. So it takes a while to unpack it all. Meanwhile, be reasonable. But most of the pain comes from the internal. Every time is unquestioned, the more you understand the Buddhist analysis. So you just have to learn to try to navigate it and then have a bit of a weep, have a good sleep and get up next morning and off you go again. And use as many practical, I mean, we're all different in our styles. So, you know, I like to have lists of things. It helps my mind get disciplined. I might have a list of 42 jobs. It doesn't matter. I've got a list. It helps me calm my mind down. And then I think of each one and then I prioritize. Any tool that works for your mind to lessen the chaos. Because if they all just go around in your head, you'll go crazy. So use whatever practical tools you can. Then meanwhile, try to have and consciously say, I'm doing my best. Never say you're busy, never even feel you're busy, and just do them one step at a time. There's lots of little tools like this. We're not perfect, and it's not going to become perfect, but it's okay. And then be reasonable. And then if we're the kind of person who you know, because all of us have got so much ego involved, meaning self-pity me is ego. You know, oh, I'm such a good girl. I help everybody. I'm mummy's little helper. I run around saying yes to everybody. And then we never do it. That's irresponsible. So it also includes having the courage to say no. No matter what people think. Because you know you've got to be reasonable. Because to say yes and then not do it and then disappoint somebody, that's difficult. So we've got to be sensible. And all of it comes down to view. It all comes down to attitude. It all comes down to how we see things and how we think about them. And it all comes down to how we think we're seen. So we're mummy's little helper and a good girl, we'll never say no. We're too scared of saying no. And then we'll get all this guilt if we can't do it. So it's like double trouble, you know. So it's the usual one is unpacking the thoughts. Food for thought.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Good, Susie. Thanks, sweetheart.
Really helpful.
Good, darling.
Yeah.
And actually, and in a way, it's so much better to be able to have jobs, to be a kind of person who wants to help others and do things. It's a wonderful quality. So be very delighted in that, and know that we can grow.
I love being busy.
Good.
And also, I'm just so aware that we can fill our time with such rubbish
That's right.
as
Exactly.
well.
That's right.
You know, when I'm so clear on my attachments, there's so many life minutes, so many precious life minutes that get hooked in to those egoic nonsense
That's right.
bullshit things, you know.
That's right.
And when I take that away, there's the spaciousness that opens
That's right.
up.
That's exactly right.
And also, yeah.
That's it.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful, Susie. Thank you, darling. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And delight, we've got to delight in our effort, delight in what we're doing, be happy with ourselves, not just push. We all push. That's very natural. That's ego. We've got to delight as well, be happy, rejoice, be delighted, praise ourselves. It's really perfect to do that. Okay. What else, people?
I have a question.
Yes, Martha. Yes, sweetheart.
I decided to stop talking to people about COVID because of my own experience. You know that my mother died of COVID. So I have in my family a split family. From my father's side of the family, my brothers, they don't believe in COVID at all.
Oh, this is so weird, isn't it? Even though your mother died of it.
Yeah, well, that's my mother was not their mother, but still, I think out of respect sometimes. So I was getting really angry because I took it like they don't understand my pain. But then, in order for me to be calm and to be with a rest mind, I decided not to talk to people that don't believe in COVID or the vaccine or anything about COVID. I just don't.
So, I mean, so sensible, Marta. Otherwise, we go crazy. You know, we go bashing our heads against brick walls completely. You're so sensible.
Exactly. So.
Exactly. I mean, but I just believe, so people really do. I mean, I hear about how people don't believe in COVID, but I mean, it's hard to imagine. What is their reasoning? What do they think it's coming from? Why do they think people talk about COVID? What do they think? What's their thoughts?
They read a lot of things in the internet and weird theories about who knows, all this kind of weird stuff, not science, but
no, I understand.
Weird stuff.
Yes,
so I just don't want to fight anymore because it's like fighting against the world.
I know, darling, that's so intelligent. That's a really major thing we need to do in our lives. And that means not even talking about them to other people. Just cancel it out. Keep your mind spacious and unangry. This is a really powerful choice. So intelligent, Martha. So sensible. My God.
Thank you.
This is what happens in our life. There is conflict, so we keep talking we shout to the other person, and then we talk about them behind their back. That's just as bad because you make yourself crazy. So for your own sanity, it is so intelligent, and it's for your benefit. Forget other people. You keep yourself sane, darling. This is so wise. So wise, Martha. Well done.
Thank you.
Amazing. So, and that's something really, I think when we think about this, we have problems. We all do have problems. Martha's problem example. We all have problems with people at work, with the husband, with friend, with family. So we fight with the person. But much of the problem is when the person's not there, we talk about them to other people. This just stirs up the fire. This just keeps making us crazy. So one of the miracle practices, if we can be brave enough, what Martha's saying, shut your mouth. Don't even talk. I mean, even let's say you've got an alcoholic brother who's suffering. We never stop talking about him behind his back. We worry about the brother. We talk to the sister about him, the uncle about him, the mummy about him. We never stop talking about the alcoholic brother. I mean, it's just we're building up misery. Shut our mouth. Leave the poor brother alone. help him if he needs help, but stop talking about him. This increases everybody's dramas. It's like the ripples go out and out and out. So speech is really powerful, you know. To control our speech is a very powerful practice. Don't underestimate it. What else, people? Something else? No.
Venerable, question.
Who is there? George and Rowena. Okay,
Sorry.
Rowena, George first, then Rowena. Go, George.
So, thank you, Venerable. This goes to the topic of grief that you brought up earlier.
Yes.
Can you share with us some practices that we can engage in that can help us to reduce our attachment and deal with grief?
Pain. Well, you know, reduce the pain from the attachment and the grief. I mean, it's first of all, it's completely normal. We are all human beings. This is how we are. So the suffering is real, you know. But see, this is what they say in all the teachings, as we know. But in the beginning, any method we start to apply to change a very old problem, it's obvious it can't change overnight. If you're 20 kilos overweight, going to the gym on the first day, you come home and you look even worse, probably. You feel worse. So we know that methods don't work overnight, but we have to have confidence in the theory of the method. Then you're prepared to persevere, isn't it? So all the lamas would say, the Buddha says, one of the deepest misconceptions in our mind, which is very linked to attachment, is the belief in things being not unchanging, or they say being permanent. So even though we know perfectly well death is natural, we know death is natural, but we are a long way from believing it. The words we know, you know perfectly well, George, and you're a Buddhist student, so you know impermanence, you know all the teachings, but in the deepest level of a level of instinctive belief, because of unbelievable attachment to me and to mine and the husband and the possessions and the life. I mean, these delusions go to such subtle levels. They are virtually instinctive. So this is the major reason, and we suffer so badly, because there was a deep assumption in your mind that your beloved wouldn't die. I mean, it seems absurd to think this, because you know perfectly well, if you were asked, yes, he will die. We know this, but it's like we utterly don't believe it. I mean, I'm saying these words, and I remember especially working on Lama Zopa's book, you know, that death book. And when I had to work really closely editing it, it sort of was very powerful. It's almost like after 45 years, it was like I began to get a taste of the truth of impermanence. I mean, it sounds so silly to say it this way, but all that's pointing to is how primordially deep. And that we, as Lama Zopa says, that we grasp at permanent me. And then we grasp at permanent him. And it's utterly linked to attachment, you know. It's so pervasive. So, I mean, the attachment, so for example, when we're in love with somebody, I always use that example of Nicole Kidman, and I love Nicole Kidman. I'm trying to be rude about her. But I remember reading an interview years ago when she was still with Tom Cruise. And you can imagine their life. Their life was good. There's this, like, you know what I'm talking about. You had a happy relationship. You and your husband were in love. You had a good life. You did good things together. So when everything is going well, that means, George, that our attachment, this deep primordial emotional hunger, is getting what it wants. That means we are experiencing happiness. And this is all we want, is happy feelings. So then, because we're so sensory, then all you think of when you think of happiness, you'd think of him, you'd think of your house, you'd think of being together, you think of this bubble. This bubble is so real. And then when you go to bed one night, you know, you believe, don't you, didn't you, with absolute certainty that this bubble will be the same tomorrow. We all believe that, don't we, George? So then Nicole, I remember, I never forget when she said, she was describing their life and all these different things and their family, their kids, and they were in love and everything. And she said, we will be together until we are 80. So let's even analyze just that statement. So because we all have attachment, because we all want to be happy, and then if we do have a beloved partner and a beloved family and beloved children and nothing wrong, it's marvelous, then what happens is, because attachment's getting what it wants, The thought of not having it is almost so unbearable. We have to make it permanent. We have to seal it in concrete. So she said, with confidence, we will be together until we are 80. Meaning, George, that when it is going beautiful, we so can't bear the thought of it not existing that we literally, I mean, literally make up a complete fantasy as if it was scientific truth, that because it's delicious now, it'll be delicious tomorrow, and it'll be delicious until we are 80. So these are all literal, they're scientific lies. Nobody can say that because we know ordinary life, we know things change. So these beliefs are so entrenched in us, George, so primordial, that we don't even notice them day to day. We take them for granted. So when those lies are proven to be wrong, what do you think there is but devastation? And as then she said, I'll never forget in this interview, the next sentence she said, and of course, if we won't be together till we're 80, I will be devastated. So at least she saw that. This is how we are, George. So when attachment stops getting what it wants, that is when the suffering and the pain is. And then because we can't bear that change, we add this other lie that it will last forever. I mean, you hear my words. These are so deep in our brains. But honey, these assumptions are why we have so much pain, only because they're lies, but we don't even notice we have them. So that's the level of the lies, and therefore the level of disappointment and pain when these lies are proved to be lies. I mean, all we can do is keep thinking these, you know, all what Buddha is, it seems like, he's just simply a person who has observed reality through the lenses of his wisdom. He's quit all the rubbish, so he's telling us how things are in reality. So all we know is, as being a Buddhist practitioner, is listening to those views, buying into those views, and slowly making those views our reality. And that's all we're trying to do. And the result of that is happiness and joy and quitting suffering. This is what practice every day, George. But we can't force it. We can't think it's bad, I'm wrong, I should be getting over it, I shouldn't have attachment. That's all meaningless rubbish. So that's one point. Now, the other one is the real powerful learning from death. We know death is definite. We know the time of death is uncertain, and you've proved it with your husband dying. But we never get the wake-up call. You know, the real way for you to get the wake-up call from this is, you know, and you must be doing this, is that will happen to me. And that kind of alerts us into action, to this powerful sense that if you're a Buddhist, I do want to not waste my life, because that will be me, and I do not know when it will be, and I don't want to waste my life. I'm going to practice. I'm going to use this time so special. I'm not going to waste time. And that gives us such enthusiasm, such energy not to waste this life, because that will be me. That's a really powerful one. It'll energize you into being useful and doing something. Meanwhile, you're still feeling the pain, but it's okay. You can still get on with it and do things, which is what you're doing. And not wasting your life, because that day, one day it'll be you. So then get the learning. Look at what to do. Look for how you can be ready for death. That's the biggest learning from it, which we don't get. We even still have the grief, the pain, but it never occurs to people to think that'll happen to me. That's a massive one we have to do that completely changes your whole life. Then you start becoming more enthusiastic. Still got the pain. It's okay. And still every time now the Dalai Lama even talks about his mum dying, he has few tears, you know, but then it passes. What do you think, sweetheart? Good. Good, George. Thank you so much, darling. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, completely it's the most, impermanence and death can be the most powerful learning for us. I'm sure you're seeing this. Unbelievable. And I think another point, this is something that I just find interesting. Having a relationship must be so special, especially if you're loving and it's your practice, you be patient, you're loving, you're kind, you're forgiving, and the person's generous and you love them and you appreciate them. I think the other aspect is that, this is the life that I've chosen, of not to have a partner. Then I think the number of people I've met who, when their partner dies, it's been a revelation for them to discover new aspects of themselves, because all their lives they've seen themselves in reference to the other person. And that I'm not necessarily complaining about. It can be bad if it's mainly attachment, but it can also be good because it's compassion. But as soon as that other person goes, you're naked. So you're discovering a new George. I bet you. Are you not? That's really, that can be a good thing. That can be a good
Most
thing.
definitely.
Huh? Isn't that true?
Most definitely.
There you
Yes,
go,
it's
Darlene.
true, Venerable.
Meanwhile, take care of yourself, sweetheart. Have your little weeps. Have a good sleep. Look after yourself. But don't waste your life. Use this precious human rebirth. Use your own amazing intelligence. Use your ability to help others, which is what you spent your life doing. Keep using it and that'll bring nourishment as well, you know. And it will bring happiness. And it will bring joy. It's a new way of you finding joy when you've had it with a partner. It's another way for you to find joy. Thank you, George, darling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable.
Time to go home. We shall end on that very thoughtful thing. Thank you so much, George. Thank you, precious people. Keep moving, never give up on our own potential, and then never give up on others. Okay. Jangchob, Semchog Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Kegyu Chig, Ke Panyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gongdu, Pavasho. Much love, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.